I stood in my own perfume shop, watching my son slide documents across the counter, documents that would force me out of the business I'd built for 40 years. Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at the $3. $2 million valuation sheet. "Sign it, Mom," he said. "You're 69. It's time to let go." That's when I understood. My own child saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and his inheritance. But let me start from the beginning, from the October morning when everything changed. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before we dive in, if you enjoy stories like this, a quick like truly helps. Now a question. Have you ever had someone you trusted completely let you down? Share in the comments. I read more than you'd think. One note, some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters most is the message it carries. The bottle of magnolia perfume I had spent 3 days blending sat on a side table within seconds of my arrival, placed there by Vanessa with the same care one gives to a takeout menu. I am Mara Bellamy, 69 years old. I can still identify vetiver from 10 feet away, and I arrived at the donor dinner carrying a hand-blended room fragrance no one at this table would appreciate. The Columns Hotel glowed with the kind of light that makes wealthy people feel even wealthier, chandeliers dripping crystal, candles flickering in hurricane glasses, silver catching flame at every angle. I had dressed carefully. Navy silk, pearls my mother gave me, shoes that pinched but photographed well. None of it mattered. Vanessa Bellamy, my daughter-in-law, 40 years old and allergic to anything that could not be photographed for social media, had taken my gift with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, her fingers already steering the bottle toward irrelevance. "I'll put this somewhere safe." The somewhere safe was a corner where nothing important lived. I watched her do it, watched her erase 3 days of my work with one fluid gesture. This was not carelessness. Carelessness is accidental. This was practiced, systematic. A woman who had learned exactly how to make another woman feel small without ever raising her voice. My son materialized at my elbow. Caleb Bellamy, 42, dressed in a suit that cost more than his monthly car payment, raised his glass to toast investors who might never return his calls. "Mom, you remember the Hartleys? They're interested in the Warehouse District project." He steered me toward a couple whose smiles suggested they were being paid to be here. Perhaps they were. I shook hands. I said the right things. I tasted champagne that probably cost more than my electric bill, and smiled while Caleb talked about square footage and projected returns. The Hartleys nodded. Vanessa laughed at something that was not funny. The room smelled of expensive cologne and ambition, and the faint, sweet decay of people trying too hard. How long does it take a family to forget who built the floor they're standing on? I had raised Caleb alone after his father left. I had paid for his education by blending custom fragrances until my hands cracked and bled. I had taught him that quality matters, that patience is a virtue, that you build something by showing up every single day and doing the work no one sees. He had learned none of it. Or he had learned it and decided it did not apply to him. Dinner was announced. We moved to a long table set with white linen and more silverware than anyone needed. I found my place card far from the investors, close to the door. A strategic placement. I was here to fill a seat, not to speak. The first course arrived, some kind of foam on a cracker. I ate it without tasting it. Around me, conversation hummed about developments and tax incentives and the endless, exhausting business of turning New Orleans into something it was never meant to be. I watched the candlelight flicker against the windows and thought about my mother's hands, how they had moved through the same motions I still performed every day, measuring and blending and sealing bottles with handwritten labels. An investor across the table, silver-haired, expensive watch, the kind of man who had never wondered where his next meal would come from, leaned toward me with practiced interest. "And Mrs. Bellamy, what keeps you busy these days?" Before I could answer, Caleb laughed. The sound was bright and sharp, designed to cut. "Mom runs a little smell counter in the quarter," he said, waving his hand as if dismissing a fly. Very quaint, very tourist-friendly. Old ladies who think handwritten labels are charming, that sort of thing. Laughter is a strange instrument. It can warm a room or slice through it like a blade dragged across glass. Vanessa added her voice, sweet and poisonous. "We keep telling her it's time to think about retirement before the neighborhood outgrows her." More laughter. The investor chuckled politely. The woman beside him covered her smile with her napkin. And my son glowed. He had traded my dignity for their approval. And in that moment, the exchange seemed worth it to him. I did not correct him. I did not set down my fork. I only watched the candlelight find the bottle I had made, still sitting in the corner where nothing important lived. 3 days of work, magnolia and jasmine, and a base note of sandalwood that my mother had taught me to layer just so. No one would ever open it. The table laughed because people laugh when the man they want money from decides something is funny. I watched my son's face glow with approval he had purchased with my dignity. The chandeliers sparkled, the silver gleamed, and somewhere in my purse, my phone began to vibrate with a name I had not seen in 40 years. I reached into my purse while the laughter was still settling. The screen read, Celeste Renard, Maison Renard Fragrances. And I understood in that instant that my Mother Ruth's suspicions had finally found their way home. Vanessa saw the name first. Her posture changed, a small stiffening that rippled through her shoulders like wind through tall grass. "Is that Maison Renard?" she whispered, her voice stripped of its usual condescension. I let the phone vibrate twice more. The table had gone quiet, conversations trailing off as people noticed the shift in energy. Caleb's smile froze halfway between charm and confusion. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew enough to sense that something had changed. I answered with deliberate calm. "Hello, Ms. Renard. Yes, this is Mara Bellamy." Celeste Renard's voice came through with the quiet authority of someone who had built a perfume empire by knowing when to listen. 58 years old, calling from New York, and about to change everything. "Mrs. Bellamy, I apologize for the evening call, but our board met this afternoon. I wanted you to hear this directly." "I'm listening." "We've approved preliminary licensing terms for your archive collection. The numbers we're discussing are in the low millions, pending authentication." I said nothing. Around me, the table had become a tableau of frozen interest. Forks suspended, wineglasses held mid-sip. The investor who had called my shop quaint was now leaning forward slightly. his expensive watch catching candlelight as he strained to hear. Have you ever watched someone realize they've been laughing at their own inheritance? Celeste continued, her tone shifting to something more careful. There's also a legal inquiry I need to discuss with you privately. One of your archive formulas, a compound your mother created in 1987, may predate our most successful fragrance by several years. Our legal team has questions about provenance. The word provenance hung in the air like smoke. I understood what she was not saying. Someone at Maison Renard was worried. Worried enough to fly to New Orleans. Worried enough to call me at 8 p.m. while I sat at a table full of people who thought my life's work was a punchline? I see, I said, keeping my voice neutral. We should discuss this properly tomorrow. I'll be in New Orleans by noon, if you're available. I'd like to visit your shop, see the archive myself. I'll make time. I ended the call and set my phone face down on the white tablecloth. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste salt and uncertainty and the sharp, metallic tang of recalibration. Everyone at this table was recalculating something. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the fish course that had arrived while I was speaking. It was cold now, but I ate it anyway. Millions. The word landed on the white tablecloth like a dropped knife. Caleb's voice cut through the quiet, pitched too high, trying to sound casual and failing entirely. Mom, what the hell was that about? I chewed, swallowed, set down my fork with the careful precision I'd learned from decades of handling delicate bottles. That was about my little smell counter, dear. Apparently, it's worth discussing. Vanessa made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been choking. The investor with the expensive watch cleared his throat. Mrs. Bellamy, he said, his tone entirely different now. My wife has been on your waiting list for 2 years. She says you're impossible to book. Custom blending takes time, I said. I don't rush. She says you trained under someone legendary, a woman who developed formulas for the European houses before opening her own atelier. My mother, Ruth Bellamy. She passed 6 years ago, but her notebooks are still in my shop. 40 years of original formulations. I let that sit. Let them do the math. 40 years of formulas, low millions in licensing, a legal inquiry about provenance. Caleb's face had gone pale. He was staring at me the way you stare at a magic trick you cannot figure out. Not wonder, but suspicion. How did she do that? How did I not know? Vanessa's fingers had gone white around the stem of her wine glass. She was calculating too, but her math was different. She was calculating how much she had underestimated and what that underestimation might cost. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. The ice had melted, leaving it tepid and flat, but I did not mind. Some things are worth waiting for. My son's silence filled the space where his mockery had been a hole in the shape of everything he had underestimated. Mom, he finally said, his voice smaller now. Why didn't you ever, I didn't know. He could not finish the sentence. He did not know how to ask the question he was really asking. Why didn't you tell me you mattered? I looked at him, really looked, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, something older, something sadder. You never asked, Caleb. The table remained silent. The chandeliers sparkled overhead. And I realized, as I lifted my fork to continue eating, that this was only the first door. Behind it waited 40 years of questions about a formula my mother Ruth had warned me someone had stolen. The brass key turned the same way it had for 41 years, and the shop exhaled its greeting citrus soaked into floorboards. Vetiver sleeping in the walls, the ghost of 10,000 bottles remembering themselves. I had not slept. After the dinner, after Caleb's silence and Vanessa's white-knuckled grip on her wineglass, I had driven home and sat in the dark until dawn. Now I stood in Bellamy Atelier as morning light filtered through the French Quarter fog, touching amber bottles arranged by note family, florals near the window, woods along the back wall, resins and musks in the cedar cabinet my mother had built herself. Caleb called this place worthless. He had never understood that the bottles he dismissed as clutter were a living archive, 40 years of formulas encoded in glass, supplier relationships written in invoice books, client histories preserved in handwritten index cards that recorded not just what people bought, but why they needed it. The widow who wanted to smell like her husband's workshop. The chef who needed a scent that didn't compete with her kitchen. The professor who had worn the same custom blend for 30 years and would accept no substitute. The back door opened. Nora Kelly, 52 and capable of filling a custom order blindfolded, unlocked her way in and set 2 coffees on the blending counter without asking how I took mine. She had worked here for 18 years, and she knew. "You're here early," she said, studying my face. "Couldn't sleep after whatever happened at that dinner." "Something's coming. Nora, I can feel it the way I feel a storm in the bass notes." A perfume shop is a library where the books evaporate. You have to keep rewriting them, or they disappear. Elise Fleming arrived 5 minutes later, 48 years old, with a memory for client preferences that rivaled any database. Already flipping through the morning's consultation requests, she paused when she saw me. "The Renard woman called the shop line twice this morning already, left a number, said she'll be here by noon." "I know." Elise exchanged a glance with Nora. Neither of them asked. They had learned, over years of working beside me, that some mornings required coffee and patience in equal measure. I left them to open the front and walked to the cedar chest in the back room, the one my mother Ruth had forbidden anyone else to touch. Inside were her notebooks, 40 years of formulations, experiments, failures, breakthroughs, each page dated, each formula signed, each correction annotated in her careful hand. Ruth Bellamy had been 70 years old in 1983, the year she taught me to identify scents blindfolded. Her fingers were always stained with bergamot in those days, and her voice carried the particular authority of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and had learned to work around. Tea. "Close your eyes," she had said, holding a strip of blotter paper beneath my nose. "Tell me what you smell, and I'll tell you what you remember." "Magnolia," I had answered, 10 years old and trying so hard to impress her. "Rain, something green underneath." "That green is Cypress. Write it down, date it, sign it. A formula without proof is just a dream someone else can steal." How do you explain to someone that a handwritten notebook is worth more than the building it sits in? I lifted the notebooks one by one, searching for the last entry. Ruth had died 6 years ago, but her presence still filled this room, the way she arranged her tools, the order she insisted upon, the small rebellions she encoded in every choice. She had spent her final years worried about something she could not name, something that made her insist I photograph every page. Store copies in the bank, Never leave the originals unattended. I had thought it was age making her suspicious. I had been wrong. The final notebook was dated 3 months before she died. Most of it was inventory notes, supplier contacts, a recipe for hand cream she had been perfecting. But near the back, I found a page I had never read. The formula was titled, "After the Rain on Royal Street." The composition was complex: cypress, magnolia, rainwater, accord. A base of ambergris and sandalwood that would take weeks to develop properly. Beneath it, in Ruth's trembling hand, was a note. Someone from Renard visited the shop today. He asked too many questions. Mara, if you're reading this, the proof is in the vial. Don't let them rewrite what we made. Ruth's voice came back to me across 40 years, clear as the Cypress accord she had invented and someone had stolen. I sat in the morning light, holding her notebook, understanding finally what she had been trying to tell me. Her insistence on documentation, her warnings about protecting formulas, her refusal to let certain visitors see the back room. None of it was paranoia. She had known. Someone had been watching, copying, waiting for her to die before claiming her work as their own. I looked at the formula again after the rain on Royal Street. Somewhere in this shop was a sealed vial that Ruth had hidden, a vial that could prove what she had created and when. I just had to find it before Celeste Renard arrived at noon. The formula was simple on paper: magnolia, black tea, cedar, cypress. But it had taken Ruth and me 3 years to make it breathe the way rain breathes when it touches Royal Street in August. I sat in the back room of the shop, Ruth's notebook open on my lap, and let the memory surface. 1995. We had finally finished After the Rain on Royal Street, after countless iterations. Ruth had developed a cypress accord, unlike anything I had smelled before, green and ancient, like standing in a bayou cathedral while the sky opened. I remembered her face that day, not triumphant, but worried. He watched my hands the whole time, she said, speaking of a visitor who had come months before. A man from a French perfume house, impeccably dressed, asking to see how we worked. Asked about the cypress 3 different ways. Maybe he was just curious, I had said. I was 40 then, still believing that admiration and theft were different languages. Ruth shook her head. Curious men ask once. Thieves ask until they understand. She had sealed a vial of that original formula the same day, dating it, signing it, locking it somewhere in this shop. 3 years later, Maison Renard launched Midnight Cypress to international acclaim, the fragrance that built their empire. The scent that appeared in every luxury magazine, every department store, every conversation about modern perfumery. A stolen formula is like a stolen child. It grows up wearing someone else's name, but the bones remember where they came from. Ruth had written to them. I found the letter copies in her files. Polite at first, then insistent, then desperate. They never responded. She had no proof that would hold up in court, only her notebooks and her conviction. By the time she died, she had stopped talking about it, but she had not stopped documenting. I closed the notebook and drove home to Marigny. The shop would open at 10. I had 2 hours to think. Sitting at my kitchen table, with coffee gone cold, I began to review 2 years of Caleb's communications, phone calls, texts, visits that always seemed casual until I looked at them together. The pattern emerged like a bruise developing under skin. "Mom, I just worry about you being alone in that building at night." That was January, 2 years ago. A cold snap had hit the city, and he called to check on me. I had been touched. The property taxes alone must be exhausting. Why not let someone else handle it? That was March. He had come by with takeout, sat in my kitchen, steered every conversation toward the burden of ownership. "You've given so much to that shop. Don't you deserve to rest?" June. A birthday dinner where rest sounded like retirement, and retirement sounded like erasure. How many times can a son call his mother overwhelmed before she realizes he means in the way? I scrolled through the messages on my phone. The language was always careful, always loving, always designed to make me feel old without saying the word. He never asked what I created in that shop. Never asked about the formulas, the clients, the waiting list that stretched 18 months. He asked only what it cost to keep, as if the keeping were the problem rather than the point. I thought about the dinner, his laughter, his description of my life's work as a quaint tourist attraction. I thought about Vanessa placing my gift in the corner where nothing important lived. I thought about 40 years of waking before dawn to open a shop my son thought was worthless. The anger I felt was not hot. It was cold and clear, like looking through water at something that had always been there. I opened my laptop and searched. First, Ruth's formula and its date. Then, Maison Renard's Midnight Cypress and its launch. The timeline was damning. Ruth's creation in 1992, Renard's launch in 1995. 3 years. Enough time for someone to take what they had seen and build a fortune on it. Then I searched something else. Caleb's name, his firm, Maison Renard. The results loaded slowly on my old connection, and then I saw it. 2 years. The pressure had lasted exactly as long as the renewed interest in Midnight Cypress. A 30th anniversary feature had run in a perfume industry magazine, naming it The Scent That Built Renard. The same month Caleb first suggested I might be overwhelmed. Coincidence is a word people use when they do not want to see patterns. I kept scrolling. Real estate listings, commercial properties, French Quarter addresses. And then there it was, a property listing from 18 months ago. The shop's address, marked "Coming Soon," submitted by my son's firm, before I had ever agreed to sell, before anyone had asked. My son had already listed my building as available. I stared at the screen. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. Outside, the morning traffic hummed past my house, ordinary and indifferent. Inside, everything I thought I knew about my family was rearranging itself into a shape I did not recognize. Caleb had not been concerned about me. He had been positioning, planning, preparing to sell something that was never his to offer. I closed my laptop and drove to the shop, the image of that listing burning behind my eyes. My son had already decided what to do with my life's work. He had just forgotten to tell me. The bell above the door rang at 3:47, and my granddaughter walked in, carrying a question I had been waiting 14 years to hear. June Bellamy, 14 and already better at identifying bass notes than her father was at identifying honesty, pushed through the door with her school backpack and a notebook she had started filling with scent observations. She had her father's height and her mother's careful posture. But her eyes, those were Ruth's, frank and searching, always looking for what lay underneath. "Grandma," she said, setting down her bag and walking straight to the rose section. "Why do these both say rose, but this one smells sad, and this one smells like dancing?" I set down the inventory list I had been pretending to read. This was it. The question that separates people who buy perfume from people who understand it. "Come here," I said. "Let me show you something." I handed her 2 blotter strips, one touched to each bottle. She held them the way I had taught her. Not too close, not waving, just letting the scent drift up on its own schedule. "This one," I said, pointing to the darker bottle, "has oud underneath, wood and smoke and something almost animal. That's why it feels heavy, why you said sad. And this one, lychee, bright and sweet, like someone laughing in another room." June looked at the labels again. "So the label lies. The label simplifies. The nose tells the truth." Teaching someone to smell is like teaching them to read a language that has no alphabet. You can only point and hope they hear what you see. Here. She wrote something in her notebook. I caught a glimpse. Rose equals not just rose. What's underneath changes everything. Underneath, she had drawn a small diagram of a pyramid, labeled top, heart, and base. "Where did you learn that?" I asked. "I looked it up after last time. I wanted to understand what you were doing." My throat tightened. 14 years old, and she was doing what her father never had, trying to understand something before deciding what it was worth. Ruth would have loved her. Ruth would have seen immediately what I was seeing now, someone who could carry this forward. We spent an hour at the blending counter. I let her smell the difference between natural and synthetic vanilla, between French and Egyptian jasmine, between the bright citrus of bergamot and the darker sweetness of blood orange. She asked questions, good questions, questions about why certain combinations worked and others clashed, about how long a scent lasted on skin versus paper, about the chemistry of evaporation. She did not ask what anything cost. She did not ask if it was profitable. She asked how it worked and why it mattered. By the time she left for her mother's car, the light outside had gone golden. I watched her climb into the passenger seat, watched Vanessa's tight smile through the windshield, watched them drive away into the French Quarter traffic. Then I locked the door and went upstairs to the office. The phone rang at 7. Caleb. You know the voice, the one your child uses when they want something, but need you to believe it was your idea. Mom, I've been thinking, he said, his tone warm and collaborative, nothing like the man who had mocked me 2 nights ago. Maybe I was too quick to dismiss your little operation. This Renard thing could be huge for the family. The family, I repeated, letting the words sit between us. Absolutely. And look, Vanessa knows a financial advisor who specializes in intellectual property. Let's set up a meeting just to protect you. Make sure no one takes advantage. Protect me. As if the danger was not sitting at his own dinner table, wearing his wife's smile. I'll think about it, I said. What's his name? Gerard Holloway. Great guy. Very connected. I wrote the name on a notepad while Caleb talked about synergy and brand positioning and family legacy words he had never used before. The phone call from Renard. When I hung up, I could still smell June's curiosity in the air. The way she had leaned over the blending counter, hungry for knowledge. And I could smell something else. the cold, metallic tang of my son's strategy shifting. He was not sorry for the mockery. He was repositioning. The asset had proven valuable, so now he wanted to manage it. I opened my laptop and searched for Gerard Holloway. His firm came up first, Holloway Asset Partners, specializing in intellectual property valuation and acquisition. His client list was not public, but a few industry articles mentioned names. 3 companies I recognized immediately, all of them subsidiaries of Maison Renard. I sat back in my chair, the screen glowing in the dark office. The net had been cast long before I knew I was swimming. Caleb's pressure, the property listing, Vanessa's advisor with his convenient expertise. This was not coincidence, and it was not family concern. This was acquisition strategy, and I was the target. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I printed every article I could find about Gerard Holloway and his Renard connections, and by morning I had a folder of my own proof that the net around me had been woven with intention. The Roosevelt's lobby smelled like gardenias and old money, and the woman waiting for me in the Sazerac bar looked like she could afford both. Celeste Renard sat in a corner booth with the posture of someone who had spent 58 years learning how to command a room without raising her voice. Chief Creative Officer of Maison Renard. Silver hair cut sharply at her jaw, wearing a charcoal blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She rose when I approached, extending her hand with a directness that surprised me. "Mrs. Bellamy, thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, her eyes steady, not the eyes of someone preparing to lie. I had spent 40 years reading people across a blending counter, and Celeste Renard looked like a woman carrying something heavy. We ordered coffee. The bar was quiet at this hour. Afternoon light filtering through beveled windows, the clink of glasses from the service station, the only interruption. I let her speak first. "I'm not here to accuse or to settle," she said, folding her hands on the table. "I'm here because something in our archive doesn't add up, and I need someone who can explain it. What exactly did you find? How do you sit across from someone who might have built their fortune on your family's stolen work and still order coffee like a civilized person?" Celeste took a breath. Our archive team was preparing materials for the 30th anniversary of Midnight Cypress. Standard process pulling original documentation, formula development records, early marketing materials. They found something that shouldn't have been there. She paused. I waited. A formula that predates our most famous creation by 3 years, submitted under the name Ruth Bellamy to a regional perfumery competition in 1993. Your aunt, I believe. My mother, I corrected quietly. Ruth raised me after my parents died. I called her aunt for years before I understood she was everything else, too. Something shifted in Celeste's expression. Not pity, but recognition. The formula she submitted and the formula we launched in 1995 share the same Cypress accord, the same progression of notes, the same molecular signature in the base that our chemists couldn't explain at the time because they didn't create it. I thought of Ruth's warnings, her insistence on documentation, her certainty that someone had watched, copied, waited. "Why are you telling me this?" Celeste spoke the way good perfumers blend precise layers, each word placed where it would do the most work. "Because I inherited this company from my father 3 years ago, and since then I've been going through his personal files, trying to understand what I actually own." She met my eyes. I found things that troubled me. Correspondence that suggested Midnight Cypress wasn't developed in our labs at all. References to field research and external acquisition that never appeared in official records. Your father knew. My father orchestrated it, or at least authorized it. I don't have every piece yet, but I have enough to understand that the fragrance that built our empire was not ours to build. The coffee arrived. I wrapped my hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my palms, grounding myself in something physical while everything else shifted. What do you want from me, Ms. Renard? The truth. Documentation. Whatever Ruth kept that proves what she created and when she created it. Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. And I want to show you what I found. She slid it across the table. I opened it. A photocopy. They had kept proof of their own theft, filed neatly under a bureaucratic label. Ruth's handwriting, unmistakable. The formula for After the Rain on Royal Street, the precursor to everything. Dated 3 years before Midnight Cypress launched. In the corner, a stamp. Acquisition Research, Confidential. I found this in my father's personal files after he died, Celeste said quietly. I think he knew exactly what he was buying when he bought it. I stared at the page. Ruth's careful notation, her precise measurements, her signature at the bottom, all of it preserved in a corporation's filing system like evidence tagged at a crime scene. She had been right. All those years of suspicion, all those letters that went unanswered, all those nights she sat in the shop, wondering if anyone would ever believe her. She had been right, and now her proof was sitting in front of me in a hotel bar, delivered by the daughter of the man who had stolen it. What are you proposing? I asked. A partnership, proper licensing, full acknowledgement of Ruth Bellamy's contribution to our catalog, and compensation, significant compensation, for what should have been paid decades ago. And your board. My board doesn't know yet. Celeste's jaw tightened. This stays between us until I understand the full picture. There are people in my company who would prefer this stayed buried. I need to know what else exists before I decide how to proceed. I understood now why Celeste had flown to New Orleans herself instead of sending lawyers. She needed to know if her suspicions were right before she decided what to do about them. The board that did not know yet would eventually have to be told, and she needed proof they could not dismiss. Celeste placed 2 paper blotters on the table between us, and for a moment I was 19 again, blindfolded in Ruth's shop, while she tested whether I could hear the difference between memory and imitation. Humor me, Celeste said. Our chemists say these are nearly identical. I want to know what you say. I lifted the first blotter and held it beneath my nose, letting the scent unfold without rushing. Top notes first, bright citrus, something green, a whisper of black tea. Then the heart rose. Cypress, the signature that had made Midnight Cypress famous. Finally, the base, where the truth always lives. Woods, amber, and something that caught wrong in my throat. I set it down and lifted the second. This one moved differently. The same notes, but arranged with intention rather than approximation. The cypress sang instead of murmured. The bass resolved cleanly. No chemical friction. This one, I said, touching the first blotter, is Midnight Cypress. Commercial-grade bergamot instead of Calabrian. Synthetic oud in place of real Hindi. And the cypress. I paused, letting the memory surface. They used Taiwanese, not Louisiana. Ruth would have noticed in seconds. Celeste's pen stopped moving. The lab couldn't identify those substitutions. They said the formulas were nearly identical. Nearly identical is a confession. Ms. Renard, if you write your own poem, you don't accidentally use someone else's rhyme scheme. A stolen recipe is like a stolen letter. You can copy every word, but the handwriting confesses. I lifted the blotters again, inhaling more deeply this time. The Midnight Cypress had a sharpness that Ruth's version lacked, something in the dry down that didn't quite resolve, a discord that most people wouldn't notice, but that would sit wrong in the back of their minds, making them reach for the bottle less often than they expected. "You're chemists," I said. "Did they ever figure out why Midnight Cypress has a shorter wear time than your other products?" Celeste's expression shifted. "That's been a mystery for years. The formula should last longer than it does. We've reformulated twice trying to fix it." "You can't fix it because you don't understand it." Ruth built her Cypress Accord to develop over 8 hours, like a story unfolding. However copied her used faster evaporating synthetics to cut costs. The architecture is the same, but the materials are wrong. It's like building a cathedral with plywood. The shape is right, but it won't hold. Ruth had spent 3 years perfecting that Cypress Accord. Whoever copied it had spent 3 hours deciding it was close enough. Celeste was writing rapidly now. I could see the questions forming before she asked them. The questions a woman asks when she realizes her inheritance is more complicated than she thought. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "Anything your mother noticed that our people missed?" I hesitated. This was the part that would change everything. The detail Ruth had written about in her final notebook, the skin reactions, the customers who came back with rashes, with headaches, with complaints they couldn't quite articulate. Ruth had theorized that the synthetic oud replacement in Midnight Cypress created a sensitivity in some wearers, something that wouldn't show up immediately, but would build over repeated exposure. "The synthetic oud," I said slowly. "The one they used instead of real Hindi. It's derived from a compound that causes dermal sensitization in about 3% of users. Not enough for most people to notice. Not enough for regulators to flag. But over time, with repeated use, skin reactions, quiet settlements, decades of knowing something was wrong and choosing not to investigate why." Celeste's face went pale. "We've had complaints for years. The legal department handled them as one-offs." "How many one-offs?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I watched her process what I had told her. The formula theft was one thing embarrassing, potentially litigable, but manageable with enough money and lawyers. But a known product defect, quietly settled for decades, built into the company's flagship fragrance. That was something else entirely. Celeste set down her pen and looked at me with something I had not expected. Relief. "I've been trying to find someone who could tell me this for 2 years, she said. "The board thought I was paranoid. But Mrs. Bellamy, if what you're saying is true, my father didn't just steal a formula. He built a lawsuit into the foundation of our most profitable product. Your father built his empire on my mother's work," I said quietly. "And he did it knowing it was stolen, knowing it was flawed, knowing that someday someone would figure it out. Someday is today." I nodded. "Someday is today." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 40 years settling between us. Outside. New Orleans moved through its afternoon rhythms, unaware of what was unfolding in this corner booth. Inside, two women were deciding what to do with the truth that could reshape everything. I drove back to the shop with Celeste's folder on the passenger seat, the photocopy of Ruth's stolen work, sitting beside me like a passenger who had waited 40 years for a ride home. The legal exposure Celeste had described would reshape everything. But first, I needed the original evidence. The cedar chest had sat in the corner of my shop for 11 years, and I had never once opened it without crying. But today, the tears would have to wait. I knelt on the worn floorboards and lifted the lid. The smell hit me first, cedar and paper, and the ghost of Ruth's hand cream, the one she made herself, with shea butter and neroli. Inside, her notebooks were stacked chronologically, each one dated on the spine in her careful script. Supplier invoices with lot numbers, correspondence with ingredient houses in Grasse and Cairo, competition entries with official stamps. And at the bottom, wrapped in velvet that had once been purple, a sealed amber vial. I lifted it carefully. The label was Ruth's handwriting, faded but legible. After the rain. Original, 1990. Do not open. 35 years. She had sealed this before the theft, before the betrayal, before anyone at Renard had ever heard her name. This vial was the chemical fingerprint, the original molecular signature that no photocopy could match, no testimony could replicate. Ruth had known someone would need this proof someday. Ruth's handwriting hadn't faded. The ink held steady the way her voice never had. She'd been soft-spoken in life, but on paper she was steel. I photographed every page before I touched anything else. The notebooks, the invoices, the competition entries, the sealed vial, from every angle. I uploaded the images to a cloud account Caleb didn't know existed, and emailed copies to myself at an address I had created that morning. Then I sat down and called the number Celeste had given me. Lionel Price answered on the second ring with a voice like gravel and honey, 65 years old, known for winning intellectual property cases before they reached a courtroom, and already asking the right questions before I had finished my first sentence. "Walk me through the documentation again," he said. "Every piece, every date, every signature." I did. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds that suggested he was writing. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Bellamy, you have more evidence than most clients I see, after 3 years of litigation. The question now is protecting it." Protecting it from whom? From anyone who might benefit from it disappearing. His voice sharpened. "Who has keys to your shop besides you?" "My employees, Nora and Elise. They've been with me for years. And my son, though he rarely uses his." How many times had Caleb let himself into the shop while I was away? How many times had I assumed he was checking on me, rather than checking on what I owned? "The employees I'm not worried about," Lionel said. "They have no stake in the outcome. Your son. However, you mentioned he's been encouraging you to sell for 2 years. And you mentioned a property listing with his firm's name on it, dated before you agreed to any sale?" "Yes." Silence on the line. Then, "Change the locks tonight. Have a locksmith come after close of business. And don't tell anyone, especially not your son. Those notebooks and that vial don't leave your sight until we've established formal chain of custody. I'll have a notary and a forensic accountant at your shop by end of week." A forensic accountant. If your son has been positioning to sell assets you own, There may be paper trails we need to follow. Trust but verify. Mrs. Bellamy. It's because when it comes to family, change the locks tonight. A lawyer I had known for 15 minutes trusted my son less than I had trusted him for 42 years. I hung up and sat in the quiet shop, surrounded by Ruth's evidence and the growing weight of what I was learning. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the blending counter, where I had spent 40 years making beautiful things for people who appreciated them. Something nagged at me. Lionel's question about keys. I walked to the back office and pulled up the electronic log, a simple system I had installed years ago to track late-night inventory. Deliveries. Every time a key turned the back lock, it logged the date, time, and key number. Caleb's key was number 4. I scrolled through the past 2 months. Caleb's key had been used 3 times in October alone. The first visit, a Tuesday afternoon, while I was at a cardiology appointment. The second, a Thursday morning, while I was getting blood work done. The third, last week, while I was meeting with my optometrist. All 3 visits happened while I was at doctor's appointments. Appointments that Caleb himself had scheduled for me, insisting that I was overdue for checkups, that he worried about my health, that a woman my age needed to be careful. The concern I had found touching now looked like something else entirely. He had not been checking on me. He had been creating windows of access, timing his visits to my shop for exactly when he knew I would be away. The locksmith came that night, a quiet man who asked no questions and left me with new keys and a sense of security that felt fragile. I slept with Ruth's notebooks under my bed and the sealed vial in a lockbox I had never told anyone about. By morning, the violation of my son's calculated access had settled into something colder clarity. The bell above the door announced Vanessa before her perfume did something expensive and synthetic that fought with the shop's natural air like 2 cats in a bag. Mara. She swept in, carrying 2 cups from an artisanal coffee place I had never heard of. Her smile calibrated to suggest spontaneity. I was in the neighborhood and thought, why not surprise my favorite mother-in-law? She had never once visited the shop without Caleb, and she had arrived at the precise window when Elise was on lunch and Nora was alone at the counter, timing that required knowledge of our schedule. I accepted the coffee. It was lukewarm, which meant she had driven from somewhere other than nearby. How thoughtful, I said. What brings you to the quarter? Oh, just errands. But I've been thinking about this space. Mara, it has such untapped potential. She turned slowly, surveying the shelves with an appraiser's eye. With the right branding, you could reach a whole new demographic. My friend Camille does boutique consulting for heritage brands. Heritage brands. You know, businesses that need help translating their traditional appeal for modern audiences. She's worked with several family companies during transitions. Vanessa spoke about the shop the way real estate agents speak about houses they are staging for sale. All potential, no history, nothing that cannot be painted over. I sipped the coffee. It tasted like oat milk and pretension. Transitions? I repeated. You mean when the old generation hands things over? Look, exactly. Making sure the legacy survives in a form that resonates today. She touched a row of amber bottles as if checking for dust. The packaging alone, I know a designer who could modernize these labels beautifully. Keep the charm, but add sophistication. Nora watched from the blending counter, her face carefully neutral. I had told her nothing about Caleb's access or Vanessa's likely purpose. But Nora had worked beside me long enough to recognize a performance. The labels, I said, were designed by my mother. She believed that handwritten text carried more honesty than fonts. Of course, so charming, very authentic. Vanessa's smile did not waver. But authenticity can be preserved while updating the presentation. It's all about context, right? You have met someone like Vanessa. Everyone has. The smile that calculates while it charms. The compliment that measures what it praises. She talked for another 15 minutes about visibility, about platforms, about the importance of narrative in modern retail. I let her talk. The more she spoke, the clearer her purpose became. She was not here to help me. She was here to take inventory. Speaking of narrative, Vanessa said, setting down her empty cup with practiced casualness. Caleb mentioned something about the Renard situation. The licensing terms must be exciting. Is that going to change how you operate? Licensing terms. I had told no one in my family about licensing terms, which meant someone else had. I felt the floor shift beneath me, just slightly. Either Celeste had talked to people she should not have, or the information pipeline between Renard and my son's circle ran deeper than I had realized. Gerard Holloway, the financial advisor with the corporate connections, the man who specialized in intellectual property. The Renard conversation is ongoing, I said carefully. Nothing is finalized. Of course, these things take time. Vanessa checked her phone, a gesture that meant the reconnaissance was complete. Well, I should let you work, but think about what I said about the branding. Camille would love to meet you. I'll think about it. She gathered her purse and smiled once more, the closing smile, the one that seals a transaction, even when nothing has been sold. Then she was gone, leaving only the fading chemical echo of her perfume. Nora came to stand beside me. Her hands were steady, but something in her expression had tightened. She asked where you keep the old notebooks, Nora said quietly, while you were in the back getting napkins. I told her I didn't know. I turned to look at her. I lied, Mrs. Bellamy. Nora met my eyes. I hope that was right. The relief that flooded through me was almost painful. 40 years of building this business, and I had never fully understood what I had built until this moment. Not just a shop, not just an archive, a family of choosing. That was exactly right. Nora, thank you. She nodded once and returned to the counter. I stood in the middle of my mother's shop, surrounded by bottles that held 40 years of memory, and understood that the battle lines were now fully drawn. Vanessa had come for reconnaissance. Caleb had been creating access for months. And somewhere in the background, connections to Renard that I could not yet see were pulling strings I was only beginning to trace. I thanked Nora again, but the gratitude was overshadowed by what she had confirmed. Vanessa had been looking for Ruth's notebooks specifically. Not the shop's value, not the real estate potential, the documentation. Someone had told her exactly what to look for. June stood in the doorway with her backpack still on, and the look on her face told me she had heard something no 14-year-old should have to translate. She had come in through the back door, the habit she had developed over months of visiting the shop after school. I had not heard her arrive. Neither, apparently, had Vanessa, which meant June had been standing in the back hallway while her mother talked about selling my life's work. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Your mom just left. Did you need a ride home? June did not move. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where Vanessa had been standing, as if she could still see the shape of the conversation that had happened there. She called you sentimental, June said. Her voice was flat, like it was a disease. So she had heard. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. Your mother worries about the family's future, I said carefully. She just expresses it differently than I would. She wants to sell this place, so you'll have nothing left to care about except them. June finally looked at me, and her eyes were old in a way that made my chest ache. That's not worry. That's control. 14 years old. Old enough to smell hypocrisy, but too young to have built defenses against it. I walked to the blending counter and pulled out the stool she usually sat on when I taught her formulas. She came slowly, setting down her backpack with the careful movements of someone processing something heavy. How much did you hear? I asked. Enough. She sat down, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the counter. She said you were getting too sentimental to make rational decisions. She said Dad should have power of attorney before you make any more mistakes. She said, June stopped, her jaw tightening. She said the notebooks were probably worthless, but they should secure them anyway, in case anyone tried to use them against the family. The notebooks. Again, the notebooks. The evidence Vanessa did not understand but knew to be dangerous. June, I said gently, what you heard. I've been hearing things for years. Grandma. Her voice was quiet but steady. Mom and Dad talking after they think I'm asleep. About your shop. About what it's costing them that you won't sell. About how you're wasting their inheritance on sentimental attachments. She looked up. I wasn't sure what to believe, but now I know. She had been watching, listening, collecting evidence the way children do when they sense something is wrong, but lack the vocabulary to name it. This visit was not a revelation for June. It was confirmation. I'm sorry you had to hear that, I said. I'm not. June's fingers stilled on the counter. I'd rather know who people really are. How do you tell a child that her parents are capable of both loving her and treating love as a transaction, that the two things can live in the same heart? We sat in silence for a while. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting familiar shadows across the bottles. The shop smelled like it always did, citrus and wood and the faint sweetness of amber. Somewhere outside, a streetcar rattled past, its bell clanging twice. Grandma, June said finally, can I ask you something? Always. She was quiet for a moment, choosing her words. When she spoke, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. Can grown-ups love money more than they love people? Like, can they think they love someone, but really just love what that person can give them? The question hit me like a wave, because she was not asking about grown-ups in general. She was asking about her parents. She was asking whether the love they showed her, the activities, the attention, the careful cultivation of her future was real, or whether it was another kind of investment, another asset to be managed. June's question sat between us like a bottle of something volatile. Answer wrong, and the whole room would catch fire. June, I started, but the words would not come. What could I say? That her father loved her, but loved what she represented more. That Vanessa's affection came with conditions. She had not yet discovered that adults were capable of a kind of selective blindness, that allowed them to believe their own manipulations were actually care. I opened my mouth to give her a gentle deflection, the kind grandmothers are supposed to offer. Something about people being complicated, about love taking many forms, about giving her parents the benefit of the doubt. But June was watching me the way she watched formulas, looking for the truth beneath the label. She was waiting to see if I would simplify, or if I would trust her with something real. "Don't lie to me, Grandma," she said quietly. "I'm tired of people in this family lying." The shop fell silent. Even the street noise seemed to fade. And I realized that whatever I said next would determine whether June saw me as another adult who chose comfort over truth, or as someone she could actually trust. I told June the truth. Not all of it. She was still 14, still deserved protection from the sharpest edges. But enough. I told her that adults sometimes confuse what they want with what they need, and that love can exist alongside selfishness in the same heart. She listened without interrupting. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. My accountant's voice on the phone had the careful flatness of someone delivering news they wished they did not have to say. "Mrs. Bellamy, I ran the background you requested, discreetly, through public records and a few contacts who owed me favors." Harold Vance had handled my taxes for 20 years. He knew my family. He knew my son. "I'm sorry to tell you this." "Just say it, Harold. They're not just stretched. They're drowning." I heard papers shuffling on his end. The second mortgage was taken out 18 months ago. Same month your property showed up on that listing. Private school tuition for June is 3 months in arrears. They've got 2 luxury car leases, membership fees at clubs they can't afford, and what looks like at least 2 failed investment partnerships. I sat down at my kitchen table. The morning light was soft, the coffee still warm, and the world was rearranging itself into a shape I had not wanted to see. How bad? At current burn rate, maybe 6 months from bankruptcy, unless something significant comes in. Debt is a kind of perfume, invisible until you get close, and then impossible to ignore. I thanked Harold and hung up. The numbers explained everything. The pressure campaign, the property listing. Vanessa's sudden interest in rebranding and asset management, none of it was about my retirement. It was about their rescue. My shop, my mother's life work, was supposed to be the lifeboat that saved my son from consequences he had built himself. For a moment, I felt something I had not expected. Pity. Caleb was not evil. He was terrified. Terrified people do desperate things. They lie to themselves first, then to everyone else. They convince themselves that the ends justify the means because they cannot face what the means actually are. But pity does not erase the damage, and desperation does not excuse betrayal. The second call came that afternoon. My cousin Della, 72 years old and sharp as glass, lived in Baton Rouge and kept in touch through Christmas cards and the occasional concerned phone call. This call was more concerned than occasional. "Mara, honey, I wasn't sure whether to call, but it's been bothering me." Her voice carried the careful weight of someone choosing words she had rehearsed. "Caleb reached out to me yesterday. He sounded worried." "What did he say?" "He said you've been acting strange lately, making big decisions without consulting family. Said some perfume company was taking advantage of you, filling your head with ideas about deals and licensing that didn't make sense." Della paused. "He mentioned maybe getting a doctor involved. When did my son decide that protecting his lifestyle was more important than protecting his mother's dignity? What kind of doctor, I asked, though I already knew. He didn't say exactly, but the way he talked, Mara, he made it sound like you might need help, like someone should be making decisions for you. Another pause. He asked if I'd noticed anything off, if you'd seemed confused or vulnerable. And what did you tell him? I told him the last time I talked to you, you were sharper than I've ever been. I told him that if anyone was confused, it might be the person trying to convince family that a 69-year-old woman can't run the business she's operated successfully for 40 years. I closed my eyes. Thank you, Della. Mara, honey, I know family business is complicated, but what Caleb was describing, it sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it to other people before me. Other people. The groundwork was already being laid. The narrative was already spreading. My son was not just pressuring me to sell. He was building a case to take control if I refused. A doctor. He wanted to bring in a doctor, not for my health, for my signature. I hung up with Della and sat very still in my kitchen. The morning light had shifted, now casting long shadows across the table where I had eaten breakfast with my family for 30 years. The house smelled like coffee and lemon polish and the faint memory of magnolia from a candle I had burned the night before. Caleb had not just been manipulating me. He had been laying groundwork to take control legally, building a paper trail of concern that would look reasonable to a judge who did not know our family. He had started this campaign weeks ago, before the Renard deal, before Celeste's phone call, before anyone knew the shop was worth anything more than its physical location. He had planned to challenge my competency from the beginning. The Renard offer just accelerated his timeline. I picked up my phone and called Lionel Price. "How fast can we build a wall?" I asked when he answered. "Because my son is trying to have me declared incompetent." Lionel listened to everything I told him about Caleb's competency campaign. He asked precise questions, took notes I could hear scratching through the phone, and promised to have protective documents drafted within 48 hours. But before we could finalize next steps, another call came through, one that changed everything. The call came from a number I did not recognize, and the voice on the other end asked a question that made my blood freeze. "Mrs. Bellamy, are you aware your son has been showing your building to buyers?" I gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this?" "Warren Hartley. We met briefly at the donor dinner last month. I'm working with your son on the warehouse district project." His voice carried the measured caution of a businessman who had built his development firm by knowing when a deal smelled wrong. "I'm conducting due diligence on several properties, and your French Quarter location came up in Caleb's portfolio. I assumed he had authority to represent it. Now I'm not so sure." I sat down slowly, my knees suddenly uncertain. "Mr. Hartley, what exactly has my son told you about my building?" He presented documents suggesting he manages the property on your behalf. "A limited power of attorney," he said. "Preliminary sale terms, a projected closing date." Hartley paused. "And a letter supposedly from you authorizing him to negotiate on your behalf." A letter from me. A letter I never wrote. Authorizing things I never agreed to. Carrying a signature I never made. "Mr. Hartley," I said, keeping my voice steady through pure force of will. "I have never given my son power of attorney over anything. I have never authorized him to sell or negotiate the sale of my property. And I certainly never wrote a letter giving him permission to do either. Silence on the line. Then, I was afraid you'd say that. Why did you call me directly? Because the numbers didn't add up. Your building is in a prime location, full ownership, no liens, paid off decades ago. A property like that doesn't usually come with a middleman eager to close fast at below-market rates. Hartley's voice hardened slightly. In my experience, when someone's in a hurry to sell something that isn't theirs, there's a reason. I wanted to verify before I became part of whatever this is. I found myself grateful for this stranger's ethics. This man I had met once at a dinner where my son mocked me, who had the integrity to question what he was being offered. "Can you send me copies of what Caleb showed you?" I asked. "The documents, the letter, all of it. I'll have my assistant scan everything within the hour." At what point does a son's desperation cross from disappointing to criminal? After we exchanged email addresses and ended the call, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything. The exact words Hartley had used, the timeline he described, the documents Caleb had apparently fabricated. I wrote the date at the top, the time, and I signed the bottom, creating my own evidence trail. Documentation that could be verified if needed. I recorded everything, dates, times, exact quotes. When you are building a case against your own child, you do not trust memory. You trust evidence. The emails arrived 30 minutes later. I opened them on my laptop, my hands steady even as my heart raced. There it was, a letter on what looked like Bellamy Atelier letterhead, bearing my name and a signature that almost looked like mine. Almost. The loops were wrong, the pressure different. Anyone who knew my handwriting would see it immediately. But a buyer in a hurry. Presented with official-looking documents by a well-dressed man with a convincing story. They might not look twice. I forwarded everything to Lionel and called him back. "I just received what you sent," he said when he answered. There was a weight in his voice I had not heard before. "Mrs. Bellamy, I need you to understand something. Tell me, what your son did with that letter isn't just overreach. If he used forged authorization documents in a business context, if he presented them to investors, to potential buyers, to anyone in a position to act on them, that's potentially wire fraud." Lionel paused. "This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a crime." The word hung in the air. Crime. My son. The one I had raised alone. The one I had put through college, blending perfume until my hands cracked. My son had committed a crime. Against me. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you. You can pursue this through civil channels, protective orders, asset freezes, documentation that prevents him from ever representing himself as your agent again. Or you can refer this to law enforcement and let them decide whether to prosecute." Another pause. "I'm not going to tell you what to do with your own family, but I am going to tell you that if more documents like this exist, if there are other investors or buyers he's approached, the exposure multiplies." I looked out my kitchen window at the garden I had planted with my own hands, the same garden where Caleb had played as a child. Somewhere along the way, that child had become someone capable of forging my signature to steal my property, and now I had to decide what to do about it. I did not call the police. Not yet. The evidence was documented, forwarded to Lionel, locked away where my son could not reach it. But turning my own child over to criminal prosecution was not a decision I could make in an afternoon. I needed time. I needed to understand what I was actually fighting for. I stayed in the shop long after closing, surrounded by 40 years of bottles that held more than scent. They held everyone I had ever loved and lost. The streetlights outside cast amber shadows through the windows, turning the shelves into something that looked almost sacred. I walked slowly through the rows, touching bottles I had not opened in years. Each one was a door. Each one held something irreplaceable. This vial, the small amber one with the hand-labeled stopper, was Ruth's last experiment. She had been working on a night-blooming jasmine accord when she got sick, and she never finished it. I kept it sealed the way she left it, a sentence waiting for an ending that would never come. This one, the square bottle with the silver cap, was Henry's birthday gift. My husband, dead now for 15 years, had worn this blend of sandalwood and tobacco every day of our marriage. Sometimes I opened it just to remember what it felt like to be held by someone who thought I was remarkable. This one was the first scent I ever made that a stranger paid for. 1963. I was 16. The woman wanted something that smelled like her grandmother's garden in Mobile. I blended magnolia and green tea and sold it for $3. She cried when she smelled it. Every bottle was a tombstone with a pulse. The people were gone. But what they loved still breathed if you knew how to open it. Caleb never asked about any of them. In 42 years of being my son, he never once sat at this counter and asked me to tell him the story of a bottle. He never wondered why certain formulas were never repeated, or why some vials were kept locked away. He looked at this room and saw inventory. He looked at this building and saw real estate. I will not let people who cannot smell value decide what happens to it. My phone rang. Celeste. I know it's late, she said, but the board finished their review. I wanted you to hear this before morning. I'm listening. The preliminary valuation is in. Licensing rights, archive acquisition, and settlement for prior unauthorized use of Ruth's formulations. She paused. We're looking at $3.2 million, minimum. Possibly more, depending on how we structure the ongoing royalties. $3.2 million. Say it slowly. Feel what that number does to a family that thought they were fighting over a dusty building. Mrs. Bellamy, are you still there? I'm here. I sat down on Ruth's stool, the one she had used for 40 years, and let the number settle into my bones. $3.2 million. The board prefers collaboration over litigation, Celeste continued. Full credit to Ruth Bellamy's estate. A capsule collection with her name on it. A clean resolution that acknowledges what happened without dragging either family through public scandal. Another pause. But you need to understand at this number, your family situation becomes very different. The people around you will change when they learn what's at stake. I almost laughed. The people around me had already changed. They had been changing for 2 years, ever since my son decided that my life's work was an asset to be liquidated. I understand, I said. Do you have legal protection in place? I'm working on it. Work faster. Celeste's voice was firm, but not unkind. At this number, people get creative, and desperate people get dangerous. At that number. Caleb's desperation made sudden, terrible sense. He had not been fighting for retirement money. He had been fighting to survive. I hung up and looked around the shop. The bottles glowed in the streetlight like small amber prayers. Ruth's notebooks sat in the cedar chest where they had waited for 40 years. The sealed vial of original formula was locked in a box only I knew existed. $3.2 million. Enough to save Caleb's family from bankruptcy 10 times over. Enough to make a 14-year-old's college fund look like pocket change. Enough to turn a dying man's desperation into something that could destroy everyone he claimed to love. I understood now why the pressure had been so relentless, why the competency narrative had started spreading, why Vanessa had come looking for the notebooks, and why Caleb had timed his visits to my doctor's appointments. They had known. Maybe not the exact number, but they had known enough. The Renard inquiry, the licensing discussions, the sudden interest from legitimate industry players. Someone had connected the dots before I did. Tomorrow, Caleb would demand a family meeting. I was certain of it. He would want to talk about the Renard situation, about family cooperation, about finding a solution that worked for everyone. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I was going to say. The answer is no, and here is why. It will stay no forever. The morning after I learned the true value of what I owned, I woke clear-headed for the first time in weeks. There was no more uncertainty. There was only preparation. Caleb arrived at my door with Vanessa behind him and the word rights already forming on his lips before I could offer them coffee. "Mom, we need to talk." He stepped past me into the living room without waiting to be invited, Vanessa trailing with her practiced smile. "I'm your son. I have a right to know what's happening with the family's assets. This affects all of us." "The family's assets," I repeated. "You mean my assets, the ones I built, the ones Ruth built before me. That's exactly what I'm talking about." Caleb sat down on my couch as if he owned it. "This Renard situation, we're hearing things, Mom. Big numbers, corporate interest. You can't navigate that alone. You need family looking out for you." Vanessa settled beside him, crossing her ankles in that deliberate way she had. "We need to think about June's future," she added. "Smart planning now protects everyone, including your granddaughter." There it was, June as a bargaining chip. Their own daughter deployed as leverage to guilt me into compliance. When did family become a word people use to demand things they have not earned? "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice steady, "but I have my own advisors, my own lawyers, my own accountant." "Mom, I'll invite you to dinner when I'm ready." I met his eyes without flinching. "At my table, after I've finished consulting with my own people. If you want a seat at the conversation, you'll wait until I offer one." Caleb's jaw tightened. Vanessa's smile froze. Neither of them had expected this. The old woman they had been conditioning for 2 years, suddenly speaking with authority they could not dismiss. "This isn't over," Caleb said as they left. "We're family, Mom. You can't cut us out." I closed the door behind them and stood very still in my own living room, surrounded by 30 years of memories they had never bothered to ask about. Before I tell you what Lionel's strategy actually looked like, the structure that would protect everything, I need to pause. If you're still with me, drop your guess in one sentence. Do you think Caleb will fight this or fold? What follows includes some dramatized details for emotional clarity, but the core remains true. That afternoon, I sat in Lionel Price's conference room with Celeste on a video call and my accountant, Harold, reviewing numbers beside me. The office smelled like leather and printer ink, and the afternoon light fell across stacks of documents that would determine the rest of my life. Lionel did not waste time. "Mrs. Bellamy, we're not just protecting assets. We're building a structure your son cannot dismantle, inherit around, or challenge in court without exposing himself to consequences he cannot afford." He laid out the architecture, a comprehensive trust that would hold the shop, the building, the archive, and all intellectual property. Operating agreements that required my explicit consent for any sale, transfer, or licensing decision. A revised will that named June's educational trust as primary beneficiary, not her parents. Healthcare directives that prevented anyone from using medical authority to challenge my decision-making capacity. Lionel did not build walls. He built a maze with one exit, and the only key would stay in my pocket. Celeste's voice came through the speaker, clear and businesslike. "Maison Renard will work with whatever structure you create. We want clean title, not family drama. The licensing agreement can reference the trust directly." "What about the fraud evidence?" I asked. "The forged letter?" Lionel exchanged a glance with Harold. "That's the leverage. If your son challenges any of these structures in court, through guardianship proceedings, through any legal mechanism, we file the fraud documentation. He faces federal charges. His career ends. His marriage probably ends too. Once Vanessa realizes he's a liability instead of an asset." I signed my name 11 times that afternoon. Each signature was a door closing on 42 years of hoping my son would become someone worth trusting. When we finished, Lionel handed me one more folder. "This is the evidence package on the forged letter," he said. "I'm not recommending you use it, but if your son challenges any of these structures, this is what we file. He needs to understand that fighting you means fighting federal fraud charges." I took the folder. It was lighter than I expected. A few pages, some photographs, copies of the forged documents. Light enough to hold in one hand, heavy enough to destroy a family. "I hope I never have to open this," I said. "So do I," Lionel replied. "But hope isn't a legal strategy. Preparation is." I gathered the signed documents, the trust, the will, the operating agreements, the healthcare directives, and placed them in my bag beside the evidence folder. Two kinds of protection. One that preserved what Ruth and I had built, and one that could end my son's life as he knew it. The weapons were loaded. Now I had to decide who got protected and who got warned. I decided to protect first and warn later. The people who had earned my trust would receive their security before Caleb received his ultimatum. That was the order things deserved. Nora and Elise sat in Lionel's conference room looking like they had been called to the principal's office, and I realized they had no idea why I had asked them to come. The room smelled like fresh coffee and legal documents, and both women sat with their hands folded on the mahogany table, uncertain whether this meeting would end their employment or expand it. I had told them nothing on the drive over, only that I needed witnesses for some paperwork and that they should clear their afternoon. "I want to thank you both for coming," I said. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound strange, so I'll ask you to let me finish before you respond." Nora exchanged a glance with Elise. Neither spoke. "You've worked beside me for 15 years, Nora. 12 for you, Elise. The shop is alive because of what you gave it, your hands, your memory, your dedication. You stayed when things were slow. You learned formulas most people don't have the patience to master. I paused. Now you'll have a say in what happens to it. Lionel slid 2 documents across the table. These are protected ownership stakes in Bellamy Atelier's operating business, he explained. 10% each, irrevocable. The company cannot be sold, transferred, or dissolved without approval from all ownership stakeholders. Ownership is not just a percentage on paper. It is a key that locks the door against people who would burn the house down for insurance. Money. Nora's face went pale. Mrs. Bellamy, we're not family. Family is who shows up, I said. Family is who cares about the work. By that measure, you're more family than my son has been in years. Elise's eyes had gone wet. She was staring at the document like it might disappear if she blinked. You're giving us ownership, real ownership with real power. If someone tries to force a sale, anyone, for any reason, they need your approval, both of you, which means the shop can't be taken without the people who understand it, agreeing that taking it is right. The room was quiet. Nora lifted her pen, looked at me once more, as if confirming I meant what I said, and signed her name. Elise followed. Lionel notarized both documents and placed them in the growing folder that represented my new architecture of protection. When they left, Nora hugged me in the doorway, something she had never done in 15 years of working together. I won't let anyone hurt what you built, she whispered. I promise. After they were gone, Lionel spread the final set of documents across the table. These were for June. What kind of inheritance is worth giving? Not money that chains you to someone else's expectations. Freedom to become who you choose. This trust is ironclad, Lionel said. Your son cannot touch it, borrow against it, or claim oversight. It funds education. Any education June chooses, plus apprenticeship opportunities if she wants them, and a modest living stipend once she turns 21. And if she decides she doesn't want to learn perfumery, then the trust funds whatever she does want: medical school, art school, traveling the world. Opening a bakery doesn't matter. Lionel met my eyes. The point isn't forcing her into the craft. Mrs. Bellamy, it's making sure no one can force her out of her own future, including her parents. I thought about June's question in the shop, whether adults could love money more than people, whether the love her parents showed her was real or conditional. This trust was my answer. I could not fix what Caleb and Vanessa had become, but I could build a wall between their desperation and their daughter's dreams. I signed my granddaughter's name into a trust, and it felt like planting a tree I might never see fully grown, but knowing the shade would be there when she needed it. The pen felt heavier with each signature, not because of the legal weight, but because of what each line represented: 40 years of work, distributed to the people who had helped build it. Ruth's legacy finally protected. A 14-year-old's future finally secured. When I finished, I gathered the documents and placed them in my bag beside the evidence folder. 2 kinds of protection, ready for 2 kinds of threat. As I left Lionel's office, my phone buzzed with a text. June's name appeared on the screen. 2 words: thank you. I stared at the message, confused. I had not told her about the trust yet. The documents were still warm from the printer. How could she know? Then I understood. Nora had called her. Of course Nora had called her. June had been visiting the shop for months, asking questions, writing in her notebook, learning from anyone who would teach her. Nora knew what the ownership stakes meant, and she knew June would want to know that someone was finally treating her grandmother's work with the respect it deserved. And June, at 14, already understood what her parents never would, that some gifts are not about money at all. I texted June back, a single heart. No words, just acknowledgement. Some understanding does not require language. Then I put my phone away and prepared for the meeting that would change everything. The conference room at Price & Associates smelled of leather and old money. Nothing like the jasmine and bergamot I had spent my life breathing. Celeste Renard sat across from me, her silver pen poised over documents that could reshape 40 years of grief into something like justice. Lionel sat to my left, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the final terms. "Before we begin," Celeste said, "I want to explain what I'm actually proposing. This isn't just a licensing deal. Mrs. Bellamy?" I waited. "I don't just want your mother's recipes." Celeste leaned forward slightly. "I want you. Your nose, your stories, your memories of how she created. That's worth more than any formula. I'm proposing a creative consultant position, $15,000 monthly, plus the licensing fee and royalties we discussed." The number hung in the air. Continued relevance, not just a payout, the chance to shape how Ruth's work would be used going forward. "The licensing fee is $1.8 million, Lionel said, walking me through the document, plus 4% royalties on all products using Ruth's formulas. The consultant role is separate, renewable annually. You'd have approval rights on any formulation bearing the Bellamy name. Have you ever signed something that felt like forgiveness? Not forgiving someone else, forgiving yourself for waiting so long to act." I thought of Ruth's hands, always stained with essences, and how she would have laughed at the idea of lawyers fighting over her little experiments. But she would have understood the stakes. She had tried to fight this battle alone, and she had lost. Now I was fighting with an army behind me. The pen felt heavier than any bottle I had ever filled, but my hand was steady. I signed my name 3 times, initialed twice, and watched Celeste countersign with the practiced efficiency of someone who closed deals for a living. "There's one more thing," Celeste said when the signing was complete. "The scientific verification. Dr. Yates is waiting at your shop." We drove to Bellamy Atelier in separate cars. The afternoon light was golden, the kind of light that makes the French Quarter look like a painting. But I was not thinking about beauty. I was thinking about proof. "Doctor." Margaret Yates was already set up in the back workroom when we arrived, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and the kind of precise movements that suggested decades of laboratory work. She specialized in fragrance forensics, Celeste had explained. Companies hired her to verify authenticity, trace supply chains, settle disputes about who created what. The workroom, where Ruth had spent 40 years blending, now held equipment that would have seemed like magic to her. A gas chromatograph, a mass spectrometer, laptop screens displaying molecular structures. What do you do when the dead are proven right? When science confirms what a mother's intuition screamed for years? "I've completed the analysis," Dr. Yates said, turning her laptop so I could see the screen. 2 graphs displayed side by side, one labeled Bellamy Original 1990 and one labeled Renard Midnight Cypress 1995. The peaks and valleys were nearly identical. The molecular signatures match to a degree that rules out coincidence. These formulas share the same architecture, the same ingredient ratios, the same progression of notes. I stared at the screen. Ruth had been right. All those years of suspicion, all those letters that went unanswered, she had been right. There's something else, Dr. Yates continued, something I found that I don't think Maison Renard knew about. She pointed to a small irregularity in the Bellamy graph, a proportion that was slightly off from what you would expect in a standard formula. This, she said, appears to be intentional, a deliberate flaw. The sandalwood ratio is 0.3% higher than optimal. It doesn't affect the scent significantly, but it creates a unique chemical fingerprint. I felt the room shift around me. Ruth's voice came back across the years. Always sign your work, Mara. Even if no one sees it, you know it's there. She built in a signature, I said quietly. Exactly. And Midnight Cypress has the same flaw. They copied everything, including the imperfection she planted. The vial in my hands, Ruth's vial, sealed in 1990, still held the faintest ghost of amber and vanilla. 35 years, and it was finally telling its truth. My mother had planted a trap in her own perfume, a secret imperfection that would one day expose a thief. She had known, even then, that someone might try to steal what she had created, and she had prepared for that moment, building evidence into the very structure of her work. She had been waiting, even from beyond the grave, for this. Celeste's voice was soft when she spoke. This changes our legal position significantly. The deliberate flaw proves direct copying from original notes. No reverse engineering could have replicated it. What happens now? I asked. Now we have options, Celeste said. Options that weren't available before this test. I looked around the workroom at Ruth's notebooks, at the equipment Dr. Yates had brought, at the vial still warm in my hand. Vindication had a weight I had not expected. It did not erase the grief, but it armed it. The evidence of Ruth's deliberate flaw changed everything. What had been corporate suspicion became courtroom certainty. I left Bellamy Atelier with Dr. Yates's report in my bag, and the weight of vindication pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. Lionel Price slid the final document across the mahogany table, and I signed my name for the 5th time that morning, each stroke a brick in the wall I was building around everything my mother had created. As of this moment, Lionel said, gathering the signed pages, your son cannot touch the shop, the formulas, or the licensing income. Not while you're alive, not after. The trust, the will, the healthcare directives, the operating agreements, they all interlock. There's no way through. And the evidence folder? I asked. Everything Dr. Yates confirmed, included the chromatography results, the deliberate flaw analysis, the timeline proving Ruth's formula predates Midnight Cypress. Lionel met my eyes. Enough to end careers, Mrs. Bellamy, if you choose to use it. These documents also include a clause allowing civil action for the stolen formulas Celeste's company has agreed to cooperation. But that cooperation has teeth. I took the folder. He offered copies of everything, organized and labeled. tonight's ammunition. That afternoon, I cooked my grandmother's gumbo. The recipe had been in our family for 4 generations, passed from hand to hand the way Ruth's formulas had been. The way everything worth preserving is passed through attention, through practice, through love. Have you ever prepared a meal knowing it might be the last one your family shares together? The roux took 45 minutes of constant stirring, the spoon moving in slow circles until the flour turned the color of dark chocolate. The smell filled my kitchen. Cayenne, bay leaf, the holy trinity of onion and celery and bell pepper. I had made this dish for Caleb's graduation, for his wedding, for June's christening. Now I was making it for a reckoning. June arrived first, slipping through the back door the way she always did. She hugged me without speaking, then sat at the kitchen counter and watched me cook. She knew something was coming. She did not ask what. Nora and Elise came together, carrying wine and the nervous energy of people who understood they had been invited to witness something important. I had told them only that tonight's dinner would clarify the future of the shop. They took seats in the living room and spoke in low voices. Celeste arrived at 6, professional in a gray blazer. Her presence a signal I wanted my son to see before he understood what it meant. Lionel followed 10 minutes later with a briefcase I knew contained backup copies of everything. The gumbo simmered the way secrets do, slowly, darkly, releasing their flavor only when the heat gets high enough. Caleb and Vanessa were last. I heard the car doors, the murmured conversation on the walkway, the hesitation before the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my son's face was already calculating. "Mother, what is this?" He stepped past me, scanning the room. "Some kind of intervention?" "Sit down." "Caleb." I closed the door behind them. "I cooked your grandmother's gumbo. The least you can do is eat it before we talk." Vanessa's whisper carried across the room. Who are all these people? She recognized Celeste. The name, Maison Renard, still meant something in circles that cared about such things. She recognized Lionel's briefcase for what it was. Her eyes moved from face to face, counting allies she did not have. I gestured toward the dining room. 8 chairs surrounded my grandmother's table. The one Ruth had eaten at as a child. The one I had inherited when she died. I had set it with the good china, the crystal glasses, the linen napkins she had embroidered herself. If this was going to be a funeral for my relationship with my son, it would at least be elegant. Everyone took their seats. June sat beside me, her hand finding mine under the table. Nora and Elise flanked her like honor guards. Celeste and Lionel sat at the far end, their presence professional, their purpose clear. Caleb and Vanessa took the remaining chairs. Isolated by geography and by the weight of what was coming. 8 chairs, 8 people, and one truth that would shatter at least 2 of them. I served the gumbo myself, ladling it over rice, placing each bowl with the care Ruth had taught me. The room smelled like home, like memory, like everything I was about to defend. When everyone had been served, I did not sit. Instead, I reached into the sideboard behind me and pulled out the evidence folder. I placed it at the center of the table, where the bread basket should have been, where something nourishing was supposed to go. "Before we eat," I said, "I need to tell you all a story about your grandmother, about what was stolen from her, and about who helped steal it." My hand rested on the folder as I looked around the table at June's nervous hope, at Nora's fierce loyalty, at Elise's steady calm. At Celeste's professional composure and Lionel's quiet readiness, at Vanessa's frozen smile and Caleb's barely concealed contempt. My son's eyes dropped to the folder, then rose to meet mine. For the first time in months, I saw something other than calculation in his face. I saw fear. I opened the folder slowly, letting the anticipation build. The room held its breath. Even the gumbo had stopped steaming, the bowls cooling while everyone waited to see what I would reveal. "Before I show you what's in here," I said, "I want to remind you of something. Caleb. Something you said at the donor dinner last month." My son shifted in his chair. "Mother, that was a social event. Whatever I said was just a little smell shop." I let the words hang in the air. "That's what you called it. A quaint hobby your grandmother couldn't let go of. A sentimental attachment that was costing the family money." I was making conversation. It wasn't meant to. I have a recording. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it on the table beside the folder. One of the investors' wives was filming the table for social media. She sent it to me afterward, thinking I might want a keepsake. I touched the screen. "Would you like to hear yourself describe my life's work as tourist bait for old ladies who like handwritten labels?" Caleb's face went pale. Vanessa's hand tightened on her wine glass. "You meant every word." I continued. "So let me show you exactly what you dismissed. Have you ever watched someone do math in their head and realize they have been a fool?" I pulled the first document from the folder and laid it on the table. The building deed. Bellamy Atelier has owned its property outright since 1994. No mortgage, no liens, full ownership. Caleb reached for the document, but I slid it away from him. This was not a negotiation. This was a revelation. The client waiting list. I placed the second document beside the first. 18 months. Custom blending appointments booked through next year. We turn away more business than most shops see in a decade. The numbers landed like verdicts, each one a guilty count against his assumptions. The supplier relationships. A third document. Exclusive agreements with ingredient houses in Grasse, Cairo, and Madagascar. Relationships Ruth built over 40 years that cannot be replicated or transferred. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes scanning the papers. I watched her do the calculations, watched the realization dawn that she had married a man who had been wrong about everything. And this. I placed the final document at the center of the table. An independent valuation completed last month. The building, the business, the archive, the intellectual property, all of it. I let them look. Let them see the number at the bottom of the page. $3.2 million, Vanessa whispered, before the Renard deal. Before the Renard deal, I confirmed. The licensing agreement adds another significant sum in fees and royalties. Your little smell shop, Caleb, is worth more than your house, your car, and your failing investment partnerships combined. The silence that followed was absolute. Nora and Elise sat perfectly still, witnesses to a reckoning they had earned the right to see. Celeste watched with professional calm. Lionel's pen hovered over his notepad, ready to document whatever came next. Caleb stared at the valuation, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something less damning. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I didn't," he started. "How was I supposed to know?" "You could have asked." My voice was quiet but sharp. In 42 years, you could have asked me once what the shop was worth. What Ruth built. What I spent my life preserving. But you never asked, Caleb. You assumed. You dismissed. You mocked. $3.2 million. Say it slowly. Let each digit settle into what you thought you knew. And you tried to take it. I pulled out the final set of documents, the property listing, the forged authorization letter, the evidence Warren Hartley had provided. You listed my building for sale before I agreed. You forged my signature. You positioned yourself to sell something that was never yours. June's voice cut through the tension, small but steady. I knew. Dad. Caleb turned to his daughter, confusion mixing with the shock already on his face. What? Grandma showed me the documents weeks ago. June met her father's eyes without flinching. The valuation, the waiting list, the Renard offer. I knew what the shop was worth before tonight, and I knew what you were trying to do to get it. The table went silent. Caleb looked at his daughter, his 14-year-old daughter, and saw something he had never expected. Judgment. She had chosen her grandmother's side, and she had chosen it with full knowledge of what that choice meant. Vanessa's hand found Caleb's arm, not in support, but in warning. Her eyes had changed, calculating something new. The wife who had partnered in his schemes was now reconsidering her position. Caleb, she said softly, we need to talk, privately. I recognized that tone. It was not concern. It was not loyalty. It was the sound of an alliance beginning to crack. A woman realizing that the man she had bet her future on had been wrong about everything that mattered. Talk here, I said. Whatever you have to say, this family needs to hear it. Vanessa did not get her private conversation. I had invited everyone to hear the truth, and the truth would be spoken in front of all of them. Caleb pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped against the hard wood, and for a moment I saw not my 42-year-old son, but the boy who used to throw tantrums when he did not get his way. You let me think it was nothing. His voice cracked with something between rage and panic. You could have told me what it was worth. You could have explained. You never asked. Caleb. I kept my voice level. Not once in 42 years. That's not fair. You always acted like the shop was just... I acted like it was my life's work. Because it was. You're the one who decided that wasn't valuable. I let the words settle. You didn't need a number to respect your grandmother's work. You needed a number to decide if I was worth respecting. The distinction landed like a slap. Caleb's mouth opened, closed. Across the table, June watched her father with an expression I recognized, the look of someone seeing clearly for the first time. Have you ever watched your own child become a stranger? Not all at once, but in small choices that added up to someone you barely recognize. Vanessa stepped in, her voice smooth despite the tension. What's done is done, but family assets should stay in family hands. And frankly, Mara, at 69, managing a national licensing deal, surely you'd benefit from having people who understand these things involved. People like you, I asked. People who care about protecting the family's interests. She glanced at the evidence folder, then back at me. This formula situation with Renard, if there are legal complications, you will need support. Formula situation. She had said it casually, as if it were common knowledge. But I had not explained the formula theft tonight. I had only shown the valuation, the forgery evidence, the financial facts. Vanessa knew about the stolen formulas. She had known before this dinner. Lionel spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms. The trust, will, and operating agreements were signed this morning. Ms. Renard's team has countersigned. The ownership stakes have been distributed. These decisions are irrevocable. Irrevocable. Such a small word for a door that would never open again. Vanessa's composure cracked, just slightly. There must be some provision for family involvement, some oversight structure. The family members Mrs. Bellamy chose to involve are already documented. Lionel gestured toward Nora and Elise. They have protected ownership stakes. June has an educational trust. The licensing income flows through structures your husband cannot access, borrow against, or inherit. The room went quiet. Vanessa looked at Caleb, really looked at him, and I saw something shift in her face. Not love, not loyalty, calculation. She was recalculating her position, and her husband was suddenly a liability instead of an asset. Caleb, I said, drawing his attention back to me, you will never inherit control. Not the shop, not the building, not the formulas. That door is closed. He stared at me, his face a mixture of anger and something raw, something that looked almost like relief. But if you stop pretending, I continued, if you let me see what's really happening with your finances, I will help you. Not as an investor, not as someone you can manipulate, as your mother. I don't need your... His voice broke. The word help could not make it past his throat. I looked at my son, really looked, and saw exhaustion underneath the anger. He was drowning, and he had been too proud to ask for a rope. How bad is it? I asked quietly. The table waited. June's hand found mine under the tablecloth. Nora and Elise sat perfectly still, witnesses to a family unraveling. Celeste watched with the professional calm of someone who had seen corporate dynasties collapse over smaller revelations. Caleb glanced at Vanessa. Something passed between them, not affection, but a shared recognition that the lies were ending. Bad enough, he said finally. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time in years, he looked at me without pretense. Bad enough that I was going to sell your building to her father's company. They already have a buyer lined up. A developer who wants to turn the whole block into luxury condos. The words hung in the air. Vanessa's face went pale, not because of the confession, but because Caleb had said it in front of witnesses. Her father's company, I repeated slowly. They've been pressuring us for months. Caleb's voice was hollow now, emptied of the bravado he had carried into this room. The debts are... It's not just the mortgages, it's everything. And they said if I could deliver the French Quarter property, they'd make it all go away. By taking my home, my mother's legacy, the building Ruth's husband built with his own hands. I know. Caleb could not meet my eyes. I know what I was doing. I couldn't see another way out. I sat with that admission while the candles flickered and the gumbo cooled, and my son waited to learn if there was anything left. Between us, worth saving. The dinner ended in silence. Vanessa had gathered her things and left without a word to anyone, including her husband. June stayed the night in my guest room, too shaken to go home to whatever remained of her parents' marriage. Caleb sat on my porch until after midnight, staring at nothing. I woke to December sunlight and the smell of coffee. I had not made Caleb was in my kitchen, and he had not left after all. He looked terrible, unshaven, still wearing yesterday's shirt, his eyes red from sleeplessness or tears or both. He had made coffee the way I taught him when he was 12 strong, with a splash of chicory, and he had set out 2 cups on the table, where his grandmother used to eat breakfast. She went to her parents' house, he said without preamble, left at 3 in the morning, took a suitcase. I sat down across from him. The morning light caught the coffee steam rising between us. Her father had already drawn up papers. Caleb continued, his voice flat. A shell company. The transfer documents were ready. All they needed was your signature or mine. If they could make me look like I had authority. The scheme was further along than anyone knew. When does a parent stop hoping their child will change and start accepting who they have become? I kept thinking next quarter would fix it, he said. Next deal, next promotion. The bonuses that were supposed to come through, but never did. I kept telling myself I could dig out before anyone noticed. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like a man holding on to something solid in a storm. It never did. Fix anything, I mean. It just kept getting worse. How much, Caleb? I asked. All of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a cardinal landed on the windowsill and sang 2 notes before flying away. 400,000, maybe more with the interest they're charging now. He could not meet my eyes. Credit cards. The second mortgage. Business loans against projections that never materialized. I borrowed against everything, the house, the cars, Vanessa's jewelry that she doesn't know I pawned. Debt is a tide. You can pretend it is not rising, but eventually you are underwater and everyone on shore can see you drowning. And June's tuition? I asked. 3 months behind. They've been sending notices. I kept hiding them. The admission hung between us. My grandson's education, my son's pride, everything he had pretended to be, all of it built on sand that was now washing away. I let the silence stretch. Let him sit with what he had said. Let the weight of $400,000 settle into the room like a third presence at the table. I will not pay your debts, I said finally. His head snapped up, surprise and something like betrayal flashing across his face. But, I continued, I will pay Harold to help you see them clearly. Monthly meetings, a real plan, accountability and structure. I don't need someone managing my... He stopped, closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had shifted. Yes, fine, I do. $400,000. Say it out loud. That is what pride costs when you let it compound. First meeting is next Tuesday, I said. I'll be there for the first one. After that, it's between you and the numbers. Caleb nodded slowly. His hands had stopped shaking around the coffee cup. This was not absolution. I was not offering to save him from consequences. But it was a rope, thrown to a man who had finally admitted he was drowning. We sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee, watching the morning light move across the kitchen floor. The house smelled like chicory and winter, and something that might have been the beginning of honesty. Mom, Caleb said eventually, can we go to the shop? The shop. Bellamy Atelier. He said the name carefully, like a word in a language he was relearning. "I want to see it, what Grandma Ruth built, what you've been protecting all this time." I studied his face. 15 years. He had not set foot inside that shop in 15 years, not since Ruth's funeral. And even then he had stayed by the door, uncomfortable, eager to leave. "All right," I said. We drove through the French Quarter in the early December afternoon, past tourists and street musicians, and the familiar facades I had walked past for 40 years. When we parked outside the shop, Caleb did not move to get out. "Mom," he said, staring at the window display, the amber bottles, the handwritten signs, the legacy he had spent years dismissing. "There's something else I need to tell you." I waited. "About how Renard got Grandma's formulas in the first place." He turned to look at me, and his face was the face of a boy who had broken something precious and hidden the pieces for decades. "About the man who came to the shop, the one she wrote about in her notebook, the one who asked too many questions." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I let him in. Mom, I was 19, and I let him into the back room while you and Grandma were at lunch. I didn't know what he was doing, but I let him in." The confession hung between us in the car, heavy as the December air. I sat very still, letting the words settle. My son, at 19, had unlocked the door that led to everything Ruth feared. "There's more," Caleb said, his voice barely audible. "They paid me $5,000, a consulting fee, they called it, for helping them understand the regional fragrance market." He laughed, bitter and hollow. "I was 19. $5,000 felt like a fortune. I didn't ask what they really wanted." I looked at the shop through the windshield, the amber bottles in the window, the hand-lettered sign Ruth had painted herself, the legacy built from nothing by a woman who knew someone would try to steal it. And they had, with my son's help. We sat in silence for a long time. I did not know what to say. There was nothing to say that would undo what had been done. "Mom," Caleb whispered, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." "No," I said finally. "It doesn't fix anything, but it's a start." Confession is like lancing a wound. The relief comes after the pain, and only if you let everything drain. The for sale sign in the window of Caleb's Mercedes caught the December light, and I watched my son photograph his own humiliation with hands that barely shook. The weeks that followed were slow and difficult. Caleb moved into a small apartment in Gentilly, nothing like the Garden District house Vanessa had insisted upon, nothing like the life he had built on borrowed money and borrowed time. He sold the car for $42,000, most of which went directly to creditors. "It's not enough," he said when he showed me the check, "but it's a start." "It's not about the money," I told him. "It's about telling the truth to yourself." He met with Harold twice before Christmas. I sat in on the first meeting, watching my son face spreadsheets that showed exactly how deep he had dug himself. The second mortgage, the credit cards, the business loans. The numbers were brutal, and Caleb flinched at every one. Can you forgive someone who did not mean to hurt you, but hurt you anyway? What about when they profited from it? I did not forgive him. Not yet. But I watched him try, and that was something. Vanessa filed for separation the week before Christmas. She moved back to her parents' house permanently, taking most of the furniture and all of her jewelry, except the pieces Caleb had pawned, which she discovered were missing when she went to pack them. June stayed with her father half the time. navigating between two homes the way children of broken marriages learn to do. "She's handling it better than I expected," Caleb told me one afternoon. She said she'd rather have parents who were honest about being unhappy than parents who pretended. "She's Ruth's great-granddaughter," I said. "She knows what pretending costs." The changes came slowly. Club memberships canceled. The country club locker cleaned out. Budget conversations with Harold that left Caleb exhausted but clearer-eyed. He still flinched when the numbers came out, still reached for excuses before catching himself. But he showed up. He kept showing up. Change does not announce itself. It shows up in small choices: a car sold, a meeting kept, a truth finally spoken. The week before Christmas, Caleb asked me a question I had not expected. "Mom," he said, "could I work at the shop just one day a week? Not for money. He trailed off, searching for words. "I want to understand what she built, what you've been protecting. I spent 40 years dismissing it, and I don't even know what a base note is." I studied his face. This was the same man who had mocked my work at a donor dinner, who had forged my signature, who had let strangers photograph his grandmother's notebooks for $5,000. But it was also my son, asking to learn something for the first time in his life without expecting to profit from it. "We'll start with the basics," I said. On Christmas Eve, Caleb arrived at Bellamy Atelier wearing an apron. The shop was closed for the holiday, but I had come to check inventory, and he had asked to join me. Nora and Elise had left early to be with their families. June was with Vanessa. It was just the two of us, surrounded by 40 years of bottles and the ghost of a woman who had built something worth stealing. "Teach me something," Caleb said. "Anything. I want to understand what she built." I walked to the shelf where the training samples lived, the same bottles Ruth had used to teach me decades ago. I pulled down a vial of bergamot and placed it in his hand. "Close your eyes," I said. "Tell me what you smell." Caleb lifted the vial to his nose and inhaled. For a moment, his face was open, unguarded, the face of a boy who had not yet learned to dismiss what he did not understand. "Citrus," he said, but also something bitter underneath, like the rind, not just the fruit. I smiled. Now we can begin. That Christmas Eve lesson stretched into something longer, something neither of us expected. By New Year's, Caleb could identify 10 bass notes blindfolded. By mid-January, he was asking questions I had not thought to answer in decades. The son who had dismissed his grandmother's work was slowly learning to smell what she had built. The Ogden Museum of Southern Art smelled like jasmine and possibility. And somewhere in the crowd of 300 people, my mother's name was printed on banners taller than I am. The launch of After the Rain on Royal Street felt like a dream I had never dared to have. The Capsule Collection, a collaboration between Bellamy Atelier and Maison Renard, filled display cases throughout the gallery. Ruth's photograph appeared in every press packet, her biography printed beside descriptions of the scents she had created decades ago. 300 industry figures, journalists, and perfume collectors had gathered to celebrate a woman who never sought recognition. Celeste stepped to the podium as the room quieted. "This collection exists because of Ruth Bellamy," she said, her voice carrying across the marble floors. "A perfumer who never sought fame, only excellence. Tonight, we give her both." My mother died, thinking no one believed her. Tonight, 300 strangers raised glasses to her name. Nora appeared at my elbow, pressing a champagne flute into my hand. Ruth would have hated the fuss, she said quietly, but she would have loved seeing her name up there. She would have complained about the lighting, I replied, and asked why they didn't use a better photograph. We both laughed, the kind of laughter that holds tears just beneath the surface. A woman in a tailored suit approached, and I recognized her from industry publications, Margaret Alcott, the new CEO of Maison Renard North America. She had replaced the previous leadership after Celeste's internal investigation revealed how deep the formula theft had gone. "Mrs. Bellamy," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to speak with you personally. The board has approved the settlement terms your lawyer proposed. Ruth's original formulas will be properly attributed, and the licensing fees have been restructured. We're also removing Midnight Cypress from our main line. It will be relaunched under the Bellamy name, with full credit to your mother. Number 4. Fame is a strange perfume. It changes how others see you, without changing who you are." I thanked her and watched her disappear into the crowd. Ruth would have appreciated the justice, but she would have appreciated the Cypress Accord more. She always cared more about the work than the recognition. June found me near the display case, holding the signature fragrance. At 14, she was too young for champagne, but old enough to understand what this night meant. "Grandma, look," she said, pointing to Ruth's photograph. "They spelled great-grandma's name right and everything." They did. And they used the picture from her 60th birthday, the one where she's laughing. She always said that was her best picture. June studied the display for a long moment. "I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you," I said. "You have her nose." After the event ended and the last guests departed, I returned to Bellamy Atelier with my inner circle, Nora, Elise, June. The shop was dark when we arrived, but I unlocked the door and turned on the small lamp Ruth had used for late-night blending sessions. The room smelled the same as it always had, citrus and vetiver and the faint sweetness of amber. "You're going to need more staff," Elise said, looking around at the shelves. "This is going to be chaos, in the best way." "We'll grow," I said, "but we won't rush. Mama never rushed a blend, and I won't rush the shop." Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what keeps growing after you are gone. June had wandered to the back of the shop, where Ruth's workbench still stood exactly as she had left it. When she returned, she was holding something in her hand, a small amber vial, unlabeled, hand-stoppered, the way Ruth used to do. "Grandma," she said, her voice uncertain, "can I show you something?" I looked at the vial. "What is that?" "I've been working on this for 6 months." She held it out carefully, like an offering. "Using great-grandma's notebooks, the ones you showed me. I wanted to try." 6 months. She had been blending in secret for 6 months while her family fell apart around her, while her parents' marriage collapsed, while her father learned to face his debts. She had been creating something. "It's not finished," June said quickly. "I know it's not right yet. The dry down is wrong, and the heart note is too strong. But," she trailed off, "would you smell it? Tell me if I have any of great-grandma in me." I took the vial from her hands. The glass was warm from her pocket, from being carried close to her body the way Ruth used to carry her experiments. I removed the stopper and lifted the opening to my nose. The first notes hit me like memory itself: lemon peel, paper, rainwater. Exactly the scents June had described wanting to capture months ago at the blending counter. But underneath, in the base, was something else. something green and ancient. Cypress. The morning light filtered through the beveled glass windows of Bellamy Atelier, casting tiny rainbows across the oak counter, where I arranged my newest collection of amber bottles. 8 months had passed since that courtroom victory. 8 months since Caleb's name stopped appearing in my inbox. The silence he left behind wasn't absence, it was space. Space I'd filled with purpose. "Mrs. Bellamy," June's voice carried from the back room. "I think I finally got the bass notes balanced." I walked toward her workstation, the same corner where I'd learned to blend under my mother's watchful eye 43 years ago. June Chen stood there, 24 years old, with steady hands and an intuition for scent that reminded me of myself at that age. She'd wandered into the shop 6 months prior, asking questions about a birthday gift for her grandmother. She left 3 hours later with a custom blend and my phone number. "Let me see what you've created," I said, settling onto the stool beside her. She handed me a testing strip with careful reverence. I lifted it to my nose and closed my eyes, letting the fragrance unfold. Bergamot opened bright and confident. Jasmine followed, soft but persistent, and beneath it all, my breath caught. Cypress. The green, woody note my mother Ruth had woven into every signature blend she'd ever created. The note I'd spent decades trying to balance correctly, never quite capturing her magic. But June had found it. Not a copy of my mother's work, but a conversation with it. "Where did you learn to use Cypress like that?" I asked. June's cheeks flushed. "I've been studying your archives. Your mother's formulas were in those notebooks you let me photograph." I noticed she used Cypress in almost everything, but always differently. I wanted to understand why. This girl had done in 6 months what I'd attempted for decades. Have you ever watched someone discover the exact thing you'd been searching for? It doesn't feel like jealousy. It feels like relief. "You have a gift," I told her, "but gifts without protection become vulnerabilities. Let me show you something." I led her to the fireproof cabinet where I kept my most important documents, the patents, the licensing agreements, the ownership papers that had saved everything when Caleb came calling. Her eyes widened as I spread them across the work table. "This is what 30 years of paranoia looks like," I said with a small laugh. "Every formula documented, every blend trademarked, every agreement reviewed by 3 attorneys before signing." "Your son tried to take this from you," June said quietly. "My son believed inheritance meant ownership without effort. He saw my life's work as his retirement fund." I touched the edge of the Maison Renard contract, $1.8 million plus 4% royalties, a partnership built on mutual respect. But legacy isn't something you receive, it's something you build. June studied the documents with the same intensity she'd brought to my mother's formulas. Smart girl. "Mrs. Bellamy," she said finally, "I want to apprentice here, officially. I want to learn everything, not just the blending, but this." She gestured at the papers. "How to protect what I create." The request settled into my chest like the final note of a perfect composition. I thought of all the years I'd imagined passing this knowledge to Caleb. That fantasy had been a garden I'd watered with denial, wondering why nothing ever bloomed. But here stood someone who'd planted her own seeds and simply asked for sunlight. Apprenticeship at Bellamy Atelier isn't a shortcut, I warned. 5 years minimum. Early mornings, late nights, and 1,000 failures before your first success worth selling. "I understand. You'll document everything, every experiment, every discovery. Your notebooks will become your armor." "Yes, ma'am." I extended my hand, and she shook it with a grip that meant business. A new chapter beginning where I'd expected an ending. That evening, after June had gone home with her signed apprenticeship contract, I sat alone in the shop's back room. The space heater hummed its familiar lullaby. Rows of amber bottles gleamed like captured sunlight on their shelves. I pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer and uncapped my fountain pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote, "The Quiet Room, a fragrance for endings that are also beginnings." The blend came easier than any I'd created before. Sandalwood for grounding, lavender for peace, a whisper of cypress threaded through like a signature, and something new, white tea, clean and forward-looking, the scent of pages not yet written. I wasn't creating this for Maison Renard or commercial release. This one was mine, a fragrance for the woman who'd fought her own blood to keep her soul intact. The shop stood quiet around me, but the silence had transformed. It no longer echoed with Caleb's absence, or Marcus's memory, or even my mother's exacting standards. It simply held space for what remained, my work, my choices, my peace. At 69 years old, I had nothing left to prove and everything left to teach. The legacy I'd defended wasn't ending, it was evolving, passing through my hands into June's capable ones, carrying forward into futures I wouldn't live to see. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. I capped the bottle and placed it on the shelf beside my mother's original formulas. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked home through streets that smelled of autumn leaves and possibility. And to you listening to my story, remember this: I spent years believing that blood alone made family. I poured my heart into building something for my son, blind to the truth that he never wanted the work, only the reward. Don't make my mistake. Don't confuse obligation with loyalty. The people who deserve your legacy are the ones who honor it, not the ones who simply expect it. This life story taught me that protecting what you build isn't selfishness, it's wisdom. Every family story has chapters we wish we could rewrite. But I believe God put me through this drama story for a reason. Not to punish me, but to show me that my worth was never tied to my son's approval. This revenge story wasn't about winning against Caleb. It was about reclaiming myself. If you're facing your own true story of betrayal, know this: you are allowed to choose peace over people who drain you. Now I want to hear from you. Has this family story touched something in your heart? Leave me a comment. Tell me what you would have done in my place. If this drama story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so we can walk through more life stories together. Thank you for staying until the very end of my true story. Your time means everything to me. One final note: while the heart of this revenge story is real, some names and details have been changed to protect those involved. What matters is the lesson, and I hope it stays with you. Take care of yourself.